What if I told you that one of the most famous, most repeated pieces of fishing advice is actually a trap? An idea so ingrained in our minds that we follow it blindly, even when it's costing us fish, especially in early spring. Today, we're talking about matching the hatch, and why, in the cold, unforgiving waters of March and April, it might be the worst advice you could possibly follow. By the end of this video, you'll understand why fish in cold water operate on a completely different set of rules, and what you need to show them to trigger those vicious boat-shaking strikes. Think about your last tough fishing trip in the early season. Did you spend hours trying to perfectly match the local bait fish or insects? Let me know in the comments, and then stick around, because we're about to blow that whole theory right out of the water. For generations, we've heard it. It's chapter 1 in the Fisherman's Handbook. From our granddads on the dock to the pros on television, the mantra is always the same. You gotta match the hatch. The logic seems bulletproof. Find out what the fish are actively feeding on, give them a perfect imitation of it, and you'll catch them. And let's be clear, for a huge part of the year, that is absolutely solid advice. When bass are schooling on shad in the summer, or trout are sipping mayflies in June, it's the only game in town. But early spring, that is a different beast entirely. It's a time of transition. The water is cold, the environment is harsh, and the fish are just beginning to wake from their winter slumber. The rules that govern the rest of the year get thrown out the window, and blindly following that match the hatch rule is a recipe for frustration and a long fishless day on the water. First, let's talk about the cold water reality. Fish are cold-blooded. This isn't just a fun fact from biology class. It is the single most important factor governing their behavior in early spring. Their body temperature is the same as the water around them. When that water is in the high 30s or low 40s, their metabolism is crawling at a snail's pace. They aren't the aggressive, active predators they'll be in a few months. Think of yourself on a cold winter morning, huddled under a blanket. You're not going to leap out of bed and sprint to the kitchen for a single potato chip. It's just not worth the energy. A bass or a trout feels the same way. Their entire existence is a game of energy management, and in cold water, that game is played with extreme prejudice. This slow metabolism means they digest food slowly and don't need to eat as often. They aren't cruising around looking for a constant meal. This fundamental biological fact is the first crack in the match the hatch foundation. This brings us to the core concept of energy conservation. A fish in 40-degree water is an energy miser. Every single movement is calculated. Chasing down a meal has to provide a significant caloric return on the energy invested. Now picture a typical early spring hatch. Maybe it's a few sparse midges on the surface or some tiny lethargic minnows hugging the bottom. From the fish's perspective, chasing one of those tiny snacks is a losing proposition. It's like you driving 20 miles to pick up a single penny off the sidewalk. The fuel you burn costs more than the reward. So, when you're out there casting a tiny 1-inch lure that perfectly imitates a local shiner, that big lethargic bass sees it, but the calculation in its brain says not worth it. The energy required to move, open its mouth, and eat that tiny offering is greater than the energy it will gain. So it just sits there, watching your perfect lure go by, and you're left wondering why nothing is biting. Let's dig into the myth of the hatch itself in early spring. When we hear that phrase, we often picture a river boiling with insects or a shoreline thick with baitfish. But in early spring, that's rarely the case. The hatches are often sporadic, unreliable, and very small in scale. A little patch of sun might warm a shallow bay enough for a few midges to pop, but it's not a widespread, consistent food source. The baitfish are still scattered and lethargic themselves, not yet grouped up into the massive schools we see in the summer. So the idea that the entire population of fish in a lake or river is keyed in on one specific emerging food source is usually a fantasy. There isn't a singular hatch to match. The fish are more like scattered, opportunistic scavengers than focused hunters. They're not waiting for the dinner bell to ring, they're just waiting for something worthwhile to drift by their nose. Because these hatches are so unreliable, the fish simply aren't keyed in on one specific thing yet. This concept of being keyed in, or selective feeding, is crucial. It happens when a food source is so abundant and reliable that fish will ignore everything else to feed exclusively on it. Think of a heavy mayfly hatch where a trout will let a juicy worm drift by to sip a tiny dry fly. That's selective feeding. But in early spring the opposite is true. There is no single dominant food source to key in on. So, the fish are in a completely opportunistic mode. They aren't looking for a very specific size, shape and color of a particular insect. They are simply looking for a meal. Any meal. As long as it meets their primary criteria, being large enough to be worth the energy to eat. This is why your hyper-realistic lure might be getting ignored. You're trying to solve a puzzle the fish aren't even playing. This leads us to the critical difference between opportunistic and selective feeding. Selective feeding is a summer luxury. It's for times of plenty. Opportunistic feeding is a springtime necessity. It's about survival. An opportunistic predator doesn't care if its meal is a crawfish, a sunfish, a shiner, or even a small bird that fell in the water. It only cares about a few things. Is it alive? Can I catch it? And is it big enough to be worth my time? When you shift your mindset from what are they eating to what is the easiest, biggest meal I can offer them, your entire approach to lure selection changes. You stop worrying about having the exact right shade of olive on your jig and start thinking about profile, vibration, and water displacement. You're no longer trying to trick a fish with a perfect imitation. You're trying to appeal to its most basic, opportunistic instincts. So, if they're not always trying to eat, what actually triggers a bite in cold water? The answer, more often than not, is annoyance. It's the reaction strike. This is a purely instinctual, aggressive response that has little to do with hunger. Imagine a big largemouth bass sitting near a log, just trying to soak up what little warmth it can. It's not actively hunting. Then, your lure comes crashing into its living room. It's loud, it's flashy, and it's invading its personal space. The fish isn't thinking, oh look, a tasty meal. It's thinking, what the hell is that, and get it away from me. The only way it knows how to do that is to attack it. This defensive territorial aggression is one of the most powerful tools in your arsenal for early spring. A lure that is big, obnoxious, and disruptive can trigger strikes from fish that would completely ignore a small, natural presentation. This is why you need to think big, not accurate. Forget the small, subtle baits for a moment. Early spring is the time for bigger profiles. Why? A bigger lure accomplishes two things. First, it presents a much more appealing meal from a caloric standpoint. It's the difference between that single potato chip and a full steak dinner. A lethargic fish is far more likely to commit to a meal that will sustain it for a while. Second, a bigger lure is inherently more provocative. It pushes more water, creates a more visible silhouette, and generally does a better job of invading a fish's personal space to trigger that reaction strike we just talked about. This is why a 6-inch swim bait, a big football jig, or a full-size suspending jerkbait can be so deadly when the water is still frigid. You're not matching a hatch. You're presenting an opportunity or a threat that is simply too big to ignore. Let's apply this to color theory in cold, murky spring water. The match the hatch philosophy often dictates natural colors, greens, browns, silvers, and in clear water, that can be a good starting point. But early spring water is often stained or muddy from snow melt and rain. Visibility is low. A natural colored lure can easily disappear just a few feet from the fish. This is where bright, even obnoxious colors come into play. Chartreuse, hot orange, fire tiger. These aren't colors you typically find in nature, but they excel at cutting through dirty water and grabbing a fish's attention. They show up from a distance, giving that slow-moving fish more time to see them, track them, and decide to strike. You're not trying to fool their brain with realism. You're trying to assault their eyes with visibility. A perfect example of this entire philosophy in action is the suspending jerkbait. Think about it. Does a Rapala Shadow Wrap or a Megabass Vision 110 really look like any specific baitfish? Not really. It's a stylized, exaggerated shape, but it's a cold water killer for a reason. Its effectiveness isn't in its perfect imitation. It's in its action and its provocation. You twitch it, it darts erratically, and then it just stops and hangs there, suspended in the water column, right in the fish's face. It's like waving your hand in front of someone's eyes. It's annoying, it's vulnerable, and it's an incredibly easy target. That long pause is what gives that slow, lethargic base the time it needs to commit. It's not matching the hatch, it's exploiting behavior. The presentation is often more important than the lure itself, and in early spring the name of the game is slow. A slow roll on a spinnerbait, a dead stick on a swim bait, or those painfully long pauses on a jerkbait. You need to give these sluggish fish a chance to catch up. A lure burning through the water at high speed is just not going to get eaten. They don't have the energy or the inclination to chase it down. You want your lure to look like the easiest possible meal. Think wounded, dying, or disoriented. A slow, methodical retrieve does exactly that. It screams easy target and appeals directly to that energy conservation instinct. Many anglers fish way too fast in the spring. Slow down, then slow down some more. You're not just fishing, you're giving the fish time to make a decision. Let's take another classic lure, the spinnerbait. Is there anything in the natural world that looks like a spinnerbait? Absolutely not. It's a bizarre contraption of wire, a lead head, a skirt, and spinning blades. It's the furthest thing from matching the hatch. Yet, it is one of the most effective early spring lures of all time. Why? Because it's a pure reaction bait. It doesn't imitate food, it creates a disturbance. The flash of the blades mimics a small school of baitfish, and the thump and vibration call fish in from a distance, even in stained water. It's a sensory overload. When you slow roll it just over a submerged weed bed, you're not trying to fool a bass into thinking it's a bluegill. You're ringing a dinner bell and creating a commotion that a territorial pre-spawn fish just has to investigate and destroy. Let's break down the water temperatures a bit more, because this is where the science really backs this up. When the water temperature is below 45 degrees Fahrenheit, a bass's world is very small. They are often grouped up in specific wintering areas, usually in deeper, more stable water. They are incredibly lethargic. At this stage, your lure practically needs to hit them on the nose. This is where super slow presentations like a jig dragged along the bottom, or that suspending jerkbait with 10-second pauses, are key. As the water creeps up towards 50 degrees, they start to move a bit more. They'll push up onto adjacent points and flats, looking for an easy meal. This is where a slowly retrieved crankbait or a spinnerbait can start to shine. Understanding these temperature thresholds tells you when to focus on pure provocation versus presenting a slow, easy meal. We also have to consider the driving force of this entire season, the pre-spawn. The fish are not just waking up, they are preparing for the most energy-intensive period of their lives. They need to build up reserves to go through the rigors of spawning. This creates a biological imperative for them to feed heavily, but they still have to do it within the constraints of their slow cold water metabolism. What does this mean? It means they are laser focused on high-calorie meals. They need the most bang for their buck. They aren't going to waste time sipping on tiny insects or chasing single small minnows. They are looking for a substantial meal, a big crawfish, a sunfish, a perch. This is another reason why upsizing your lures and presenting a large calorie-rich profile is the winning strategy. You're giving them exactly what their bodies are telling them they need. Let's paint a picture to make this crystal clear. Imagine you're a 5-pound largemouth bass just chilling by a stump in 42-degree water. You're cold, you're slow, but you know you need to eat soon to get ready for the spawn. First, a small natural-colored jig that perfectly imitates an emerging nymph drifts by, about 5 feet away. To eat it, you'd have to move, intercept it, and consume it for a minimal caloric gain. Your fish brain says, pass. An hour later, a big, gaudy, chartreuse and white spinnerbait comes wobbling and flashing by, just a foot over your head. It's loud, it's annoying, and it looks like a substantial meal. Even if you're not hungry, it's an intruder in your space. Your predatory instinct takes over. With one powerful kick of your tail, you can engulf it. That is the choice you're presenting to the fish, a tiny, accurate snack or a big, unmissable opportunity. This leads to what I call the intruder principle. In early spring, it's often more effective to think of your lure not as food, but as an intruder. It's an invader in the fish's personal territory, which is often very small and well-defined in cold water. Bass, trout, and many other species are inherently territorial, and this instinct gets heightened as they prepare to spawn and guard their nesting areas. A lure that is retrieved erratically, or makes a lot of noise is perceived as a threat. It could be a rival fish, a nest-robbing bluegill, or some other creature that doesn't belong. The fish's reaction is not one of feeding, but of defense. It strikes the lure to kill it or drive it away. This is a powerful, hardwired instinct that you can exploit, and it has absolutely nothing to do with matching any kind of hatch. And don't think this is just a bass fishing thing. Let's talk about trout. The entire foundation of modern fly fishing is built on the concept of matching the hatch. But if you talk to any serious early season trout angler, they'll tell you that March and April are not the time for tiny size 22 dry flies. It's streamer season. They are throwing massive articulated flies that look like deformed bait fish, sculpins, or even mice. These giant flies are designed to do one thing: provoke a reaction from the biggest, most dominant trout in the river. That big brown trout isn't looking for a tiny midge. It's looking for a substantial, high-protein meal to pack on weight after a long winter. They are triggering the same predatory territorial instincts that we target in bass. The principle is universal across species. Now, is there ever a time when matching the hatch works in spring? Yes, but it's the exception that proves the rule. If you encounter a truly massive, sustained hatch, say, a huge population of midges emerging for days on end in a shallow, protected bay that has warmed up significantly faster than the main lake, then yes, the fish might key in on that. But these situations are rare and highly localized. For 95% of your early spring fishing, in 95% of the lake, the fish will be in that opportunistic reactive mode. Relying on finding that 1 in a million scenario is a poor strategy. A much better approach is to stick with the high percentage techniques that target the general mood and metabolism of the fish population as a whole. I remember one specific day that burned this lesson into my brain forever. It was a cold, windy day in early April on a local reservoir. The water was about 46 degrees. I saw a couple of other boats out, and every one of them was painstakingly fishing small Ned rigs and drop shots right on the bottom, trying to imitate the little gobies in the lake. They weren't catching anything. I was frustrated too, until I decided to just get aggressive. I tied on a loud, rattling, fire tiger-colored square-bill crankbait, a lure most people save for summer. I started grinding it through the shallow rock and wood. The retrieve was slow, but the lure itself was obnoxious. The result was instantaneous. In the next 2 hours, I landed 5 solid bass, including one over 4 pounds. I wasn't matching anything. I was creating a disturbance and forcing a reaction. So, what does this mean for your tackle box? It means you need to make a mental shift. Push those finesse baits to the side for a bit. Your frontline soldiers for early spring should be lures that have presence, suspending jerkbaits in both bright and natural colors, lipless crankbaits that you can yo-yo off the bottom, creating vibration and sound, medium diving crankbaits in reds and oranges that you can bang off rocks to create deflection strikes, spinnerbaits and bladed jigs that put out a ton of thump, and don't forget big bulky jigs with large trailers that present a huge slow-moving protein package. These are your tools of provocation. They are designed to appeal to a fish's aggression and its need for a big, easy meal, not its ability to identify an exact species of minnow. Ultimately, the biggest change has to happen between your ears. You have to stop thinking like an aquatic biologist and start thinking like a cold, lethargic, and grumpy predator. The question shouldn't be, what exact insect emerged today? The question should be, what can I throw that is impossible to ignore? What can I present that looks like the easiest, biggest meal this fish will see all week? When you start with those questions, your lure choices and your presentation will change dramatically. You'll stop trying to delicately fool the fish and start trying to bully them into biting. And in the cold, tough world of early spring fishing, that aggressive mindset is exactly what it takes to get the job done. It's a fundamental shift from imitation to provocation. So, let's bring it all home. The age-old wisdom of matching the hatch isn't necessarily wrong, but it's a tool for a different season. It's often tragically misapplied in the unique, challenging conditions of early spring. When the water is cold, a fish's entire world shrinks. Their metabolism is in low gear, they are desperately trying to conserve energy, and they are either looking for a massive, easy meal to fuel the upcoming spawn, or they are lashing out at anything that invades their space. The real aha moment, the big turning point, is realizing that your lure doesn't always have to be seen as food. It can be an annoyance, a threat, an intruder that triggers a purely instinctual defensive strike that has nothing to do with hunger. That's the secret weapon for cold water. This simple shift in thinking, from imitation to provocation, can be the absolute difference between a frustrating day of casting practice and a day of bent rods and great memories. It opens up your tackle box and gives you the confidence to throw those big, loud, obnoxious baits that a cold, grumpy fish just can't resist. Thanks for watching and for being willing to question the old rules with us. If this video changed how you're going to approach your next spring trip, do me a favor and hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next video, where we break another fishing myth. Now, I really want to hear from you. What's the one lure you swear by in early spring, even if it looks like nothing that lives in the water? Drop your answer in the comments below. Let's get a good discussion going and help each other out.